away from fire station number 6. From 1931 to 1971, Mrs. DeLeo cooked the Sunday lunch for the firemen every Sunday from 1931 to 1971. Man, I mean that's a lot. That's a long time. You know, that's a lot of a few hundred to 1,000 pounds of pasta going across the street. And I have met people who remember seeing Mr. DeLeo at about 11:55 every Sunday, carrying this big plate of pasta and meatballs and Italian bread over to the fire station. So, you know, that's what you call a close-knit community, I think. When your neighbor, you know, brings you food all the time. When Mr. DeLeo passed away, the Italian church was loaded with firemen. His pallbearers were firemen. He was just a big name in the fire industry. And talk about close-knit community. I grew up with about 50 guys that I still see today. And every other month we go out to dinner or we go out to lunch. Every other month, 50 of us guys that all grew up together, and we get to see each other quite a bit. That's definitely close-knit. Some of the key businesses on India Street are no different than the businesses in the towns you grew up in. Grocery stores, meat markets, drugstores, movie theaters, barber shops, tortilla factory. Would you believe we had a tortilla factory right in the center of Little Italy? And it was called El Indio. Does that ring a bell yet? Okay, okay. Yeah, it was called El Indio, and they just moved. They've been in San Diego on India Street for 75 years. They just moved not too quite a few years ago up on India Street near Washington Street, and they just celebrated their 75th anniversary. There was only one restaurant in San Diego when I was a little kid, and it was Ortega's Fine Mexican Food. But when you think about it, why did you have to go out to dinner? Why did you need restaurants in town when you had the best cooks at home? Your mother, your grandmother. We always ate at home. I don't think I ate in a restaurant till I was about 16 years old, 15. I felt like an old man at that time, but it was just the way it was. A Bay City drugstore, standing on the corner, watching all the girls go by. I'm seeing just a very few smiles, but this drugstore was this drugstore was just on the corner of India and First Street, and this is typical throughout the United States. I'll bet every town in the United States has way back when had a drugstore, and when the ladies in the neighborhood came down the street, they all eyeballed the girls as they walked by there. My mother and my aunt told me that if they saw a group of guys at the corner drugstore, they'd go up to Columbia Street or down to Kettner Boulevard, and they would bypass these guys, and they nicknamed these guys Drugstore Cowboys. And over the years, a lot of the ladies married Drugstore Cowboys. And the owner of the drugstore during World War II, displayed photographs all along the ceiling of all the young men who were stationed in the military at that time. Today, we have Piazza Basilone out there honoring Sergeant John Basilone and local servicemen who lost their lives in World War II. And there are also 3 flags down here, those of Italian, Portuguese, and Mexican descent. And those flags are honoring the young men of those nationalities who were lost during the war. Oh, I'll give you a secret. This coming Sunday, we're going to have the Italian Festa, and the Convivio, well, is going to have a setup right smack dab in front of this drugstore here. I was raised on the corner of India and Hawthorne, and for the first...
I see Ortega's restaurant.
Ortega's restaurant, that's right.
Across from your
Right,
house.
and this was taken about 1951. This gas station is still here, but it's not a gas station. They sell those little yellow 2-wheel putt-putts where 2 people can drive all over San Diego on. Yeah, most of you have seen that, okay. But I could look down for about 22 years, I could look down Hawthorne Street and I'd look out into the bay and I could see Navy ships anchored out in the bay all those years. And these were usually submarine tenders. And as I grew older and got into high school, all of a sudden it dawned on me that each of these ships had baseball teams. Because when I was in high school, I started playing baseball against a lot of these sailors from the various ships that were anchored out in the bay. Now, some of you, I'm not sure, but up until 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you saw a tower that was called Fat City China Camp. You saw that. Okay. Well, it ain't there anymore.
I avoided that like the plague.
And well, when I was growing up, this was called Tops. It was built in 1940, and it had the name Tops. It had a top spinning around on the top, and it was a nightclub, it was a diner, and it was a drive-in restaurant where you drive your car in, and the car hop came out and put your food on the window of your car, and big name players down there, like Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, participated down in that area. A lot of Italians had their children's wedding receptions done at Tops quite often. And Tops was a place where a young Italian boy had a chance to meet a young Italian girl. And I was one of the young Italian boys. I was the best man at my best friend's wedding. And during that wedding reception, I got to meet my future wife of about 2 years later. So that was a pretty neat place. However, today, that's gone. There's a 333 unit hotel that'll be rising up in the air and going across. And when you read your Confetti for Gino, there'll be a lot of stuff going on down at Tops. The young fishermen used to like to hang out down there, and it was a pretty activity. I swore I would not let the cat out of the bag, so I won't say anything else. The Honeymoon Cottages. Any of you familiar with the corner of Indian Hawthorne where Mona Lisa restaurant's located? Still no restaurant. Okay. Well, anyway, on this side of the street is the Mona Lisa restaurant. This side of the street are 7 little yellow houses that my grandfather Girolamo Bregante built in 1922. That was the year he went back to Italy for the very first time since he arrived, and he arrived in the United States in 1886. So these houses are still there. Unfortunately, my family doesn't own them anymore. But it was the first residence for a lot of newly married couples. It was a real fun place. And the fishermen started moving out as their families started growing. But those houses are still there. I lived a half a block from my grandfather Augustino, and he had a lot of fishing gear, so I spent hours and hours pretending I was a fisherman. And that's about as close as I ever came to becoming a fisherman. There were a lot of activities that keep children busy in San Diego. Playing in lots, playgrounds, over at the church, the waterfront, baseball games, football in Balboa Park. One thing I remembered quite vividly was following house-moving trucks. During World War II and that era, there were a lot of empty lots in Little Italy. A lot of empty lots. But you would see a lot of trucks, truck movers coming down the streets with a huge house on there, bringing it down to some empty lot in the neighborhood. There are empty lots for grown-ups to play their bocce ball, empty lots for children. If you notice, this low area here is quite dark. This was a lot. This lot was about 50 feet away from the house that I lived in, on the little yellow courthouses. Well, after Christmas, a lot of the people in the neighborhood would bring their Christmas trees over to this lot and burn them. You're not going to do that today, I don't think. But back in those days, they were doing it. One day I was walking down, this is Columbia, walking down Columbia Street, looking down the street, and all of a sudden I see this big house, the movers pulling it down the street, so I just watch it and just tag it. It comes down the street, it comes down to this lot here, and they start to move that house on this lot. And that was about 1948, 1947. Just about a year ago, I watched this house that was here, watched it being demolished. And that was the end of the lot. Oh, I talked to you about nicknames. This is Nookie, and that's Cookie. Everybody in the neighborhood had nicknames back in those days. I got in trouble in the grown-up lots. I watched the men play bocce ball, and they would yell and cuss in Italian. And I'd go home and tell my mother, "Ma, I just learned a couple new Italian words. Don't you ever say that again." So that was it for me. During World War II, my parents entertained a lot of my Uncle Fortunato's buddies. My Uncle Fortunato, my mom, and their cousin. My grandfather was delighted to see sailors who had recently served with his son. So throughout the war, my mother was cooking dinners. My uncle told them, "Go see Angie at 2119 India Street, and she'll cook you a great dinner." So throughout the war, we had sailors coming by the house, and my folks felt pretty proud of what they were doing at that time. But the war continued, and it continues. And we continued to get sailors coming over during the war. And apparently all the sailors heard about Angie at 2119 India Street, and they were coming over, knocking on the door. Fortunato said, we're supposed to see Angie, and she's supposed to give us a good dinner. So we were feeding sailors, and my folks felt real good about that, pretty proud that, that they could reach out. Two institutions influencing our development: Washington Elementary School, built 1914, torn down about 1965. But this was an elegant school, 3 stories. When you walk inside to the second floor, just gorgeous marble floor in there, a 2-story auditorium in there, a big library, a big dining room. It was enormous. About 1965 they tore down because they said it wasn't earthquake proof. And I watched them tear that down and watched the big ball hitting against there. And the word got around that demolition company lost big time because they had a tough time trying to demolish that building down there. And if any of you have been down to Little Italy or will go down there someday, regardless of your religious affiliation, you need to go into this building. It's gorgeous. The paintings on the wall, the architecture in there is just magnificent. If you were going to forego a trip to Italy this year, I'd say go in there for a few minutes and you'll get the feel that you're in Italy. Street vendors, vegetable, fruit peddlers. Wine season. You know, we're in wine season today. And if you were in Little Italy today, you'd probably smell the fishermen rinsing out the barrels and dumping all the sediment in their backyard, or else dumping it in the street and let it go down to the gutter. So you'd be smelling within a week or so wine barrels being cleaned, and then grapes are delivered curbside to your house in wooden crates, and they're all standing outside there. And as kids, we'd walk down the street eating grapes as we walked down there. And then the pulp from crushing all that would be put back into the wooden crate and then picked up by the vintner to take back to the field and dump it in there. Occasionally, I'd ask my grandfather if I could fill his wine bottle. And once in a while, he would say yes, but only once in a while. So I'd take his bottle, I'd go downstairs, but he didn't have a spigot on the wine barrel. So I'd have to take the hose, the plug out, put a hose in there, take 3 or 4 snorts of wine to prime the hose, and then put that hose into the bottle to fill the bottle. And that didn't happen very often. And it was pretty rank. I didn't, but in those days, Italian community, children were allowed to drink a little wine, not too much, maybe a 1/4 inch of wine, but they were allowed to participate. In Italy, everybody drank. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I mean, young children,
No?
not that much, just a little bit.
Un poco.
Un poco.
Some of the sights in Little Italy: fishermen walking home from the bay, lobster traps stacked in backyards. Everybody had a vegetable garden. The biggest crop was tomatoes, fish eggs on the lines. Everybody had a fig tree. some of the impressions, little sounds of chickens and ducks, all the fishermen did have fowl that they liked to cook and eat. Aroma of sauces cooking, bread in outdoor ovens. I remember the sound of trains and airplanes. But the sound I remember most is the sound of the airplanes. Where I lived, right near Ivy Street, was almost a flight path of Lindbergh Field. And during World War II, we had a manufacturing company down there that was building B-24 Liberators. And they built over 1,000 Liberators during World War II. And I swear, every 1,000 of those flew right over my house. They would shake and rattle the dishes in the kitchen. It was quite a trip. And at night I could hear a bugle when I was laying in bed, and that was coming from the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. Nicknames were common through the generations. My grandfather's generation, the firstborn child to a grandfather would get that grandfather's first name. So in my town, grandfather's town, there could have been 4 Jim Bregantes in one town because they all got Jim Bregante name. Okay? My father's generation, nicknames were still given to differentiate between relatives, but some were given in jest, like Sea Lion Johnny, Rockhead Johnny. These two relatives had the same first name, the same last name, and they married 2 ladies who had the same last name. So so Sea Lion Johnny was an outstanding fisherman who would catch sea lions and sell to the zoo, San Diego Zoo, for the sea lion show. Rockcod Johnny was an outstanding rockcod fisherman, so he was nicknamed Rockcod Johnny. Then there was my generation. Are you getting ready for this? Are your eyes perking up a little bit? Okay. In my generation, nicknames were given in jest. You could be 6 years old, you go to the playground, and you have a funny looking haircut, and your buddies look at you and point at you and laugh. It says, "God, he looks like Little Beaver." Little Beaver was the sidekick of a cowboy many years ago. So all of a sudden, Andy gets the nickname Beaver. So 70 or more years later,